This is Bricks and Clicks, where Cliff Hudson and Craig Miller explore the real conversations and innovative strategies with industry leaders behind transforming legacy brands for long-term sustainable growth in the digital age.
Hello, this is Clifford Hudson. It's good to be with you again here, talking about Bricks and Clicks. And as always, I'm here with my longtime partner, Craig Miller. And we're looking forward today to talk about new world, new rules, new opportunities. In our case, working together at Sonic, it was a process of retrofitting the brand, you might say, for the 21st century with new ways of engaging with customers and also trying to drive operational efficiencies for our operators across the system. We have a couple of guests with us here today, and I think that this should be a very interesting review of some of the activities we conducted, 10 more years ago, but also just kind of the state of things in this 21st century manner of engaging with customers and with people generally. Our guests are Brandon Byars and Ryan Murray, both of ThoughtWorks, very key partner for Sonic for a number of years in helping us bring our integrated customer engagement to life. So, Brandon, Ryan, why don't I let you all introduce yourselves, and then we'll kind of get back to the Sonic piece. So tell us a little about yourselves and ThoughtWorks.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. Appreciate it. So I'm Brandon Byars. I've been with ThoughtWorks going on 16 years now and played a number of leadership roles in the organization. ThoughtWorks is a digital transformation company. We really started and built a brand around, for those of you closer to the engineering side, around this wave of agile development, and then that moved into DevOps and a lot of digital approaches that enabled businesses to move more at pace. I worked at the time that we worked with Sonic, very hand in glove with Ryan, who had come up with this vision. I'll let him talk about it here in a minute, around how to build acceleration into business ambition through digital technologies. And Sonic, we were ahead of the industry at the time in some of those techniques, but Sonic was a great partner on that journey. Since when we started Sonic, I played some of the advisor and kind of technology strategy role and helped to oversee it for a bit. And since then, I moved on to other leadership roles in ThoughtWorks. So I'll let Ryan introduce himself and some of that vision.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Cliff. It's great to be here with you, Cliff and Craig, again, back in revisiting our Sonic days. As Brandon said, I'm an executive technical director at ThoughtWorks. I've been here over 12 years and have focused a lot over the last 5 to 7 years in helping our clients think about strategically adopting cloud technologies, and really across all of the aspects that are critically important to building a modern platform. So thinking about APIs, event-driven architectures, and how all of these innovations that are happening in the cloud really enable business outcomes to get delivered fast. And so thinking about how organizations compose teams, how they change their operating model. And as Brandon said, Sonic was one of our early clients for what the strategy that I had been putting together around how to think about digital platforms and building a strategy and taking advantage of all of what was happening around the cloud, as true today as it was then. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you guys here. And Craig, any thoughts before I kind of jump into some of my history with issues related to these areas?
No, well, we'll get into the discussion, but just reiterating what a critical role ThoughtWorks played as our partner as we were thinking about how to really execute and get this strategy off the ground. But I'll follow on with the discussion, Cliff, after you.
Great. Well, perhaps Craig knows about what I'm about to jump into well, because we've lived it time and again. Maybe Brandon, Ryan, this may be history that you have with Sonic as well. But really, as the last century closed out, we at Sonic were kind of working into a number of things in attempt to move the business forward that started moving towards the greater role of technology having an impact on our business. In the 90s, it had been about very conventional expansion. It was product-oriented, media-oriented, a new skin to the building at an average Sonic drive-in, retrofit, so to speak. And all these things had really moved the business forward quite dramatically. There were other elements, though, that kind of started raising their head. One, it was clear that sooner than later, we were going to need a new point of sale system. I just didn't know how much later that would actually be before we kind of rolled out. But at any rate, we're going to need a new point of sale system. And we had, of course, as a company, started moving more to digital communications between cell phones, email, texting, et cetera, and doing that with stores as well. And so you start seeing these things come together, at least potentially come together in a more integrated way. Early part of this century, 2001 or so, I had the opportunity to go to a conference where Visa was the sponsor. And they really promoted the idea, of course, gee, restaurants, why don't you use Visa cards more? Not a surprise. And today it's ubiquitous, and majority of the transactions are through credit in one digital form or in another. Back at that time, it wasn't true. 95% of Sonic sales were coming from cash. And so when I heard the Visa person say, mom is the one that determines the buying. And if you accept a credit card, make it easier for her to use a credit card, she'll be twice as likely to stop in your shop as she will a place that doesn't accept a credit card or make the credit card easy. And that number kind of stunned me. She also said, by the way, not a surprise, when people use credit cards, they also spend more money. And so hearing those two things, one would be more likely to get the business if we made it easier, and two, they'd spend more money. I returned to the office and talked to my guys about why can't we do like the service stations do, and have a credit card reader attached to the stall. With some resistance inside, and took some while to get some experimentation. Well, we got it in test, and it just worked incredibly well. In fact, people, when they used a credit card, they spent 40% more than our usual cash check. So it was a knockout, a home run. And we rolled that out quickly. It was a big boost to our sales. So that was really kind of the first time. Innovation was in Sonic's DNA historically, but it probably was the first time where we used a new technology, rolled out rapidly across the system to provide different type of convenience to the customer, and had just a wonderful impact on sales across the system. But then I started kind of looking at these things and saying, we have all these touch points now with the consumer, with the operator, with the franchisor. If we could kind of integrate these, get them connected, what could this do for us in the long run? This was pre-Apple, pre-apps, not pre-Apple, but pre the iPhone, pre-apps, et cetera, et cetera. And so I pulled something together, actually presented to my board in 2004, called Techno Oval. That's what I was calling it. I thought that sounded pretty advanced and ahead of things in the world. But the Techno Oval was what I presented to the board in 2004. Our listeners may recall an earlier podcast with Bob Rosenberg where we talked about that. So you move all that fast forward, and we start seeing the need for additional technology, store level and above, engagement with the consumer, store level and beyond. And this became a greater obvious need for us, both in terms of how we build with the consumer, but also need for talent inside. So it was about that time, let's just say 2009, that Craig came on board, joined our team. Craig told me afterwards that my crude little Techno Oval was a real draw to him, which I'm amazed about today. Not really. He's come to help me understand the importance of it. But at any rate, so Craig came on in 2009 and really started providing some great leadership, management leadership, but thought leadership, strategic leadership, and helped us really move on a new path here in the 21st century with what became not the Techno Oval, but our integrated customer engagement. So, Craig, why don't you pick it up from there, and we can turn to our friends from ThoughtWorks and kind of tell the story.
Yes. Happy to. Thanks, Cliff. Cliff, as you talked about, one of the primary things that really got me excited was at that point, I had worked with lots of companies on implementing advanced technical solutions to help drive the business. But your thinking and your vision was so far ahead of where most were at companies the size of Sonic, and particularly in the restaurant industry. And as we talk with our friends here at ThoughtWorks, we'll talk through that. They also have a tremendous amount of experience and history with how to bring these types of strategies, to life. I had to sit down and for every business a little bit different. The tech fairly kind of consistent, but I had to think about how do we take your techno-oval and implement it into what you were driving as a strategic framework of the flywheel, which is momentum into the business. And what was really occurring to me at the time was many companies were either digital natives or traditional brick and mortars, and really the thought of how do the two go together? It's really a bricks and clicks type of thinking, and the combination of leveraging kind of the physical aspects of your business model, but enhancing it, empowering it with these new digital capabilities. There were a number of kind of steps to our playbook, which for the listener could be applied really kind of to any business. And one of the critical steps were once we got some of the foundational blueprinting and some of the foundational building blocks, our technology in the restaurants, as you well know, was far behind. One of the critical aspects of being able to really execute is bringing on a partner that could help augment not only our competency in these areas, but our capacity, and again, way ahead of where most companies were thinking, and a chance to really bring it to life. And so ThoughtWorks I had done some work with ThoughtWorks in some previous situations, and I knew that they would become critical for us. Particularly as we got past some of those initial fundamental building blocks, the point of sale, testing it, the new POPs digital stall, and even mobile, all in pilots. But what we really needed was a partner that was very experienced, and you'll hear Brandon Ryan talk about this concept of platform, but it was really integrated nature of all that, which is really fundamental, Cliff, to your vision, was your techno-oval, how you tie it all together. And so a lot of companies really avoid, because of the complexity of what we just described, or they don't have talent or capacity or competency. ThoughtWorks really played a critical role in, kind of partnering with us, at the time. And so I would love, I think the listeners would really get a great learnings from ThoughtWorks. You maybe can share just kind of at that point some of the technology that you'd seen in other brands, and just how did Sonic, from my perspective, way ahead of where people were thinking, but you had at that point 25 some odd years with lots of companies all around the globe. Maybe you could share with our listeners some of what you've seen elsewhere, and then also your thoughts of Sonic, the vision, and and how that compared to some of your other clients.
So Ryan and I had both been consulting with other firms. I think most recently in advance of Sonic, I had been at a large airline, Ryan at retail. And while those are quite different industries than the QSR restaurant industry, I think we were seeing certain patterns that we were able to identify as impediments for any business going on this digital journey that Sonic was just ahead of the curve on. And a lot of that was recognizing that mobile had come out. There was this need for organizations to expose internal capabilities in a way that had been previously built for their brick and mortar business or for internal business users, now to the external world. And you ended up with this dichotomy where you had maybe the digital part of the business that supported something like e-com and was on their journey towards mobile, versus the traditional part of the digital infrastructure underneath that supported the business at large and kept the lights on. And that dichotomy was an impediment. It was slowing organizations down regardless of the industry sector that they were in. And you also had these other, a lot of momentum around some other new enabling technologies. Ryan had mentioned the cloud. That was a big deal, and it was getting a lot of resistance in that era still from a lot of traditional infrastructure organizations who were struggling with this shift from the data center and the policies and security requirements of moving from what they had used to govern in terms of a colo or something to the self-service nature of the cloud. That also had financial implications of moving to OpEx. So it was a real big shift for a lot of organizations to try to think through this push for digitalization. And I think what we saw at Sonic was a real need that we'll get into here to figure out how to put the foot on the gas pedal and accelerate using some of these enabling technologies that were coming to really starting to penetrate the market more deeply to kind of unify the tech estate. And I think Ryan had put together a really great vision of how that all came together, where the sum was greater than where the total was greater than the sum of its parts. Maybe Ryan, I'll let you introduce some of that.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. And going back to your question, Craig, I think, like Brandon said, I was working in retail with one of the more common brands that we all would recognize, and I think that they were also having the same kind of. We're starting a little earlier than the restaurant industry, obviously, in thinking about how to bring digital to the client. As Brandon noted, it was often the website experience and the in-store experience were fairly disconnected. And so one of the things that I think that Sonic was really far ahead on was understanding the importance of that integrated experience for the customer. And so just examples of that, the customer being able to recognize the customer, their purchase history, whether they be at a terminal or whether they be in the store, what retail was playing with at the time, and I don't think it's fully taken off. But how do you sort of digitize and add some of the excitement of technology into the in-store experience? And in retail, people were thinking about, how do I have associates walking around with tablets where they would have information about the customer and be able to do more right on the site sort of advising. And I think Sonic was really ahead of a lot of the retail industry at the time in terms of its thinking. So that was a really exciting thing to have to be challenged with building.
Can you describe what the nature of that, Sonic was ahead quote? Can you describe the nature of that?
Thinking about, I think what you said earlier, Cliff, like really kind of making the experience seamless across the physical location and sort of digital experience. At the time, a lot of retailers, again, it was people had started doing a lot of work in the online shopping space, but it was you're either online or you're either in the store. I think Sonic to be bringing the technology, a live screen to the drive-in and being able to know the customer and being able to save payment information, being able to think about how to make it very smooth for a customer to interact with Sonic in this technology-enabled way instead of just at the normal till inside the store, and making sure that kind of experience. I remember at the very beginning, you were already thinking about, how do we start to add additional value now that we have information that we can be bringing right to a terminal about nutritional information or food preferences. There was just so many creative ideas of how to make that experience seamless and bring the best of value, not just serving as a restaurant, but also thinking about nutrition and other value adds to the client. Again, I don't think the industry as a whole, broadly speaking, retail and other industries have done a great job yet at really integrating the different types of value they could provide to the client, and how do you do it in terms of having a physical touch point that's also technology enabled. I don't think anybody's done it that well yet. And I think Sonic was thinking about all these things as absolutely at the avant-garde, and you did a bunch of them. And so I think what was really exciting was then, what do we have to do to be able to achieve that goal in terms of those traditional point of sale systems that you're using in a restaurant that run the kitchen and that run the till and all. Though being able to integrate with those has always been traditionally very difficult. And so I think Sonic's vision for how important that was and putting energy into making that possible and setting us up to be able to really help on the digital front was another thing that was very ahead of the time. I've worked with a lot of other clients that continue to make poor architectural decisions and continue to not invest in making the what we might call legacy technology, but still essential, like point of sale technology and this technology that ran the restaurant was critically important infrastructure and would continue to be. And really investing in the ability to interface with that in a modern way is one of the things I think also that was really that you guys were really ahead of the curve. Most companies at that time were still putting duct tape and band-aids on legacy systems to try to digitize, or just building systems entirely separate, and that then didn't enable an integrated customer experience.
Well, the interesting thing, I think a good thing from our standpoint, was many of these things we really needed to do, even if we didn't integrate all this, and even if we didn't take it to the level we ultimately did in terms of customer interface. We were way overdue on a software-based point of sale system. And then the other elements, as we talked through these things with our operators, our pitch to them was, you're not going to have to go through unnecessary expenditures. You're going to do this stuff anyway. Anything that's incremental to effectuate this, we, the franchisor, are paying for it, or our vendors are paying for it. So it was an easier sell to our operators than perhaps some of your other clients might have been able to pull off. Who knows? So.
But and then there's one other point that I think where Sonic was thinking ahead of a lot of other clients that we had worked with, which was the common pattern is to look at some new digital enabler and say, let's solve for that. And the easiest path to solve for that is to spin up an initiative, get your investment funding, spin up the resources to do it, and deliver it. And what you end up with is the next legacy system in that context. You build up, if you're always chasing the next business strategy through technology, you end up over time with more and more systems that you have to maintain, because that's the easiest path to solve any particular initiative. And I remember, Doug Cook was there. He was helping to on the architecture front. I remember he was helping to think through how to sort of get this point across to some of the leaders and the board around this need for acceleration, not just the next digital initiative, but using the next digital initiative, in this case it was Order Ahead, as the path for enabling acceleration towards improved customer experience through digital technologies over time. And I think that was unique at Sonic at that time, because I think that is what you see in a lot of these digital native companies. They accelerate over time differently than most companies that decelerate over time because they're just chasing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
And I think for the listener, the vision and the thinking ahead, but the execution of some of these things in Cliff, certainly the point of sale, there was no choice. But for the digital pops, or even the mobile, we were so far ahead of the thinking in the restaurant industry. Those were the added values, some of the newer things that many companies, at least that I see, and I'd love to hear again ThoughtWorks from the perspective of how it compares to Sonic. They tend to kind of fear that complexity. Cliff, you and we as leaders, really consistently drove through. We had the perspective. I think you mentioned it, Cliff, earlier. We had the perspective of we really don't have a choice. So whether it was we had no choice at the point of sale because it was a 30, 40, plus year old piece of technology. We knew with your vision and leadership that where the consumers and the customers were going, that we would ultimately have no choice but to, as I think we have it in our book, skate to where the customer was going to be. We take the advantage of building this out, and so so the importance of it's not a matter of trying to avoid complexity because you have to face it anyway. Whether it's the point of sale or whether consumers are going to force you there anyway, whether the competitive environment's going to force you there anyway. And having a partner like ThoughtWorks who, had, already thinking like this, has had the expertise to complement your vision, to complement what we had strategically to execute it. Those are the types of things that I've seen. And, again, just would love, Brandon and Ryan to talk about, some of the mistakes that you kind of see other companies make that we did not, that allowed us to be very successful with what we built. And then I do want to get into, you mentioned the Order Ahead, because that was a great innovation that came out of all this. But maybe you can kind of share what are some of the other mistakes that you kind of see in terms of the thinking that have to be changed, overcome, where Sonic, really kind of drove through those and in a very productive way.
Why don't I take a first pass and then Ryan let you dive in with a few other patterns? And this first one kind of builds on the point I just made around building for acceleration. I think what Sonic was really good at was challenging legacy, and especially thinking about the personas of the customer. And we'll get to the order ahead story, but not just thinking about the experience itself, but thinking about the underlying business capabilities that enable that experience. And we would solve for those underlying capabilities as a way of rationalizing the tech estate and the legacy underneath it to build that acceleration that I was talking about over time. And you actually saw that, like some of the APIs that exposed some of these business capabilities were subsequently reused by other systems like your call center and so forth. So we were able to get more leverage out of these assets that we were building because we had been thoughtful about how we looked at your business and then applied an overlay of technology on top of that, and then applied the customer experience to try to solve for those as kind of separate components. And that was, and even today, is, I think, a healthy pattern that a lot of organizations struggle to adopt because it does require culture, it requires funding and investment decisions, it requires governance, around second order benefits to your business, not just the immediate benefit in front of you. So I think that was certainly a healthy pattern that we saw at Sonic, and there was a lot of courageous leadership to provide the right air cover for that. To get that over the line, to advance the ICE initiative over time. Ryan, maybe I'd let you chime in with a couple of others.
Yeah, I think that the willingness to change the organization. One of the things that you all did was really bring technology and the kind of marketing and overall customer facing functions together, and I think that's incredibly important for what Brandon was talking about. To be able to challenge how systems have always been built and how business has always been done. Is required by definition. The rules of the game are changing. Obviously, all of the systems. What I've seen a lot of companies struggle with is if they have 20, maybe even 30-year-old systems that have been running their core business. We've seen this a lot in financial services and retail. The business owners start to believe that the way those systems were built is the way their business must run, and they actually lose creativity about what's possible. They lose the customer focus. They just assume that there are certain constraints on the business when a lot of them were technical constraints, what systems could do at the time. And I think that's a big mistake that people make, is not investing in really a bit of blue sky modeling for what does our business look like today? What could it look like in the near future? How would we build a set of systems that would support us and create some flexibility for us? Now let's look at current state and see what constraints we're dealing with. But doing that blue sky thinking is really important to be able to unlock the fundamental aspects of your business. If you think about, just as an example, in any retail environment, you have things like how you do planning and how you eventually buy from your suppliers. And a lot of older systems would club together the whole supply chain, from planning all the way through to supply chain fulfillment as one system. And so, you lose the ability to realize that, well, we could plug different vendors in, we could interact, and we could create different efficiencies in the workflow if we really look at the individual capabilities that are needed, instead of just think, well, we have one system that does it all and that's just the way everything is. And so I think that Sonic was way ahead in that respect of really envisioning what they wanted for the customer first, and then saying, now what would the technology need to do to support that? And now let's look at some of the constraints that we have and work backwards from there. And then to have the choice of really changing the way the technology organization was structured made that much more doable. I'm not going to say it was easy, but a lot of organizations have, because the systems themselves are owned by organizational structures, it's very difficult to refactor or change how systems are going to support the business process, because there's whole organizational structures, software engineering teams, and people have built up around them. I'm even now, this many years later, I'm in a client, with a very similar problem where they are literally moving at half or less the speed they could be, because organizational structures and the communication between them are stopping them from evolving their technology quickly. So I do think that's a critical aspect that you guys did incredibly well, was taking that tough decision, but also pulling everybody under one umbrella so that you could move quickly and make the right technology and architectural decisions.
Well, in a way, that's fascinating. Thanks for that Ryan, because you've talked about a fairly fundamental approach to this, where someone could think about it from the outset, how to go about it. But it does, I mean, a listener who works in this area has appreciation for that, but also lots of questions and concerns. Might be interesting for them to hear from you, if they're embarking on a new strategy of taking a 20th century business into the 21st, what they should be thinking about. And I realize first base, what they should be thinking about is hiring ThoughtWorks. But beyond first base, what should a key takeaway be for folks that are listening to this as they think about their own journey of this sort?
Well, Cliff, it's funny you say that, because I think one of the key factors to being able to make change, whether it be the technology or in the organization, the operating model, and it will be necessary. The operating model has to change to become more effective in this digital world, because we all know. I think everybody by now hopefully understands the importance of being able to build things quickly and test them with your customers, get feedback, and then throw out the things that didn't work and evolve and do the things that did. I think this is for some companies, though, that's still a cultural shift.
Yeah.
The ability to have a vision and test it and pivot as you learn things is really critical, because the more complicated the landscape of technology becomes, and the more that's possible, the more permutations and opportunities that you could be experimenting with. You don't know which ones are going to land. You can't predict it all ahead of time. So having this long range kind of planning approach and assuming you know where you're going over the next 3 years is still a problem I see in organizations. So having that building in the flexibility to do experiments, which means changing people's incentives. This is a major challenge, is people will continue to operate and hit deadlines and do the things they've been taught to do unless you change the incentives so that experimentation and learning becomes the major benefit or the major desired behavior that we see. And so I think that's really important. And having a partner like ThoughtWorks is so valuable, because we've done this so many times, we hit the mark more often. Now, there's always experimentation in what works for the customer, but at least in terms of the technology delivery, the same problem happens. We're not just experimenting to learn about what our customer wants. We're also experimenting to learn how to work with new technologies. As they're emerging, like Brandon said earlier, the cloud was at a much more nascent state all these years ago. And so there was a lot of things that you need to learn about how to develop in this new paradigm. If today you're starting to look at maybe AR and VR as technology, again, nascent state, how do you learn how to build things effectively is the next most important thing after what does the customer really want and how do you find that out in the fastest way possible. Then you have to learn you have to be willing to build stuff and make mistakes. And again, that requires real attention to the culture of the organization, the operating model of the organization. Like, will people be able to learn? Again, using a partner that knows what they're doing can reduce some of the friction, but in the end, the organization needs to invest in skill set development and making it possible to learn and grow quickly. And I think that's something that ThoughtWorks loves doing, is helping organizations to learn from us. We love to hand off kind of our ways of working, our practices, our culture, because I think that in the end, long-term success is going to be determined largely by a culture of fast feedback and willingness to take chances and iterate and make tough decisions quickly and put investments in the right place. And that was true in the days of Sonic. You guys were pretty far ahead. And I think that honestly, those going into the future, that might be one of the most important things companies need to pay attention to, is their culture of being willing to experiment, learn, and make tough decisions, reallocate investments quickly.
Well, and Cliff, you mentioned a great example of that, in the back of that Visa conference you went to and trying to get ahead of credit card payments. I know, a theme of the chapter that we're doing this podcast on, we've heard from Craig, is the internet and the evolution of that and how it really changed business models. And I think that really piggybacks well onto what Ryan just said, is organizations have to be willing to sense and invest in these new technology waves. AI is a big one at the moment. The ones that we have seen that try to be laggards in some of these technology waves wait for other organizations to prove out their value and then jump in, don't get the outsized benefit. You have to figure out the investment strategy throughout so that you can sense and learn as an organization and not be left behind.
Well, I would like to think that was part of our culture ongoing. When you go to the very core thing at Sonic, at the store level, all the food's made to order. Customer drives it. So it's all, just almost from the outset, with Troy and the way the business works. It wasn't about warming bins. The customer, I always said about Sonic, with our competitors, the customer was almost coincidental to the business. And in Sonic's case, everything was about the customer. And the food we didn't start preparing it until the customer ordered it, and it was customized for their benefit. So I think that ingenuity, new products every month, variations on products and other innovation, orientation toward innovation over time kind of set a natural DNA to move that direction. And then, technology obviously took it to another level altogether, particularly as it relates to customer engagement.
And we kind of touched upon it a little early, but I'm sure you all see this now at an accelerated pace. One of the great innovations, an example of how all of this came together, the fundamental technologies, the integration of it all, focus on customer experience, the organizational, the cultural, retrofitting all of that. Many great benefits and we had a franchisee, one of our leading franchisees that we spoke to on a podcast that just talked about their skepticism initially, but really the great value being able to run their restaurant in ways that he wasn't able to run it before, driving ticket and traffic, and really all coming together, which just shows it all seems tough going through it, but
that was James Junkin, and he said they thought it was pie in the sky futuristic stuff. And yet in the pandemic, he said it was golden, particularly as related to customer interface. And then, as you say, he also said it enabled him to run his business now differently than he could have otherwise, and much better, more effectively.
And so I think that's one learning is it's going to feel like, and we have a chapter, we talk about the messy middles. It's going to feel messy. But ultimately, one of the great innovations, we mentioned it a little earlier, the order ahead. And that really grew out of, as we were learning and as we were testing and as we started to envision where customers are going, and it was the early days of mobile, and how we would differentiate ourselves. And Cliff, jump in here, but Cliff branded it as the filet, first in line every time. Because when we started to look at ways we could now really bring these capabilities to life in ways that others couldn't, particularly in the restaurant industry. No one had 25 stalls, but everyone was drive through from or dine in. But it wasn't a great experience when you're sitting on a line of 10, 15, 20 people. We had the ability with this to bring this experience to life and this enormous convenience to be able to tie the integrated nature of this experience to order ahead and essentially come to one of the 25 stalls and pick it. It was enormously successful, and this was before pandemic, and this is before companies were really doing it well. What do you recall from you talked a little bit about Doug, saying we got to accelerate this piece of it. Cliff was on CNBC talking about it when it was being launched. It was enormously successful, and some even have asked Cliff, did you know about the pandemic? I mean, how did you foresee needing this? And so what do you recall from kind of really bringing this one enormously successful innovation to life for Sonic back? This would have been back in 2018.
Yeah, and that was, I think, the catalyst for a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of finding the path to something that was transformational to the business, like order ahead, but also being thoughtful about the digital enablers that would pave the path for the next digital ambition and the next, and these experiments that Ryan talked about. And it was another great example where you see, maybe unexpected or second order benefits from being ambitious on the digital approach, very similar to what Cliff talked about with credit card payments. Moms spend more money with credit cards because you're not limited by how much cash you have on you. The same thing we heard was true with the mobile experience in order ahead. It had a basket size increase. So it was easier to just do maybe something like a group order on your phone rather than click on or work through the speaker at the terminal. And so I think you had unexpected benefits that were really manifested, as you rightly called out, in the pandemic, where there was already a very significant amount of revenue coming in through digital streams that positioned Sonic well. So I think the benefits is, and it was a partner ecosystem. We were working with other partners, but I think Sonic did an amazing job at trying to make sure that we all work together as one team to try to benefit, the overall customer, never lose sight of the end benefit that we're chasing, make sure that we all had alignment on that vision, which is difficult for some of these large programs of work where there are multiple stakeholders and multiple partners in the ecosystem. And then just continue to, in the process, to rationalize the estate and the legacy underneath it so that you could have the platform for other digital ambitions even beyond order ahead.
Yeah, I just throw it on top of that. It really is that the customer focus drove the architecture, and that's actually how a lot of these benefits really happened. Was instead of kind of thinking this is what we've already got and how do we make it work for something like order ahead, it really was, what does a customer want? And when you thought about what the customer wants, you come to this idea of order ahead. Then naturally, as you start to build systems around it, you start to build natural boundaries between things, because you can already imagine, well, what if the customer wanted the following? What if they wanted to have a group order? What if they wanted more nutritional information? What if? And doing that blue sky thinking, and then having the fortitude to say, now what investments do we need to make to be able to do this flexibly? How do we integrate, and at the time, several different software delivery support was coming from several different vendors around the point of sale system and people that were already working on the kiosk, on the POPs kiosk. And like has been said, like really saying, look, there's a design company who's thinking about this. There's this, you guys as a technology platform company, there are specialized vendors in the mix. We're all collaborating. We're all going to make the right decisions that rather than just the expedient ones. We're not going to conform to history. We're going to start by thinking what's the right way to do this. And by towing the line, and that takes leadership. That's not just an engineering or a design choice. It takes real leadership. And Doug and others, Craig yourself, there was real focus on, we're going to do this in a modular and a way that is going to allow us flexibility, because we know that we've got in the pipeline 2-3 more ideas, and we know we're going to have more as soon as people start interacting with this stuff. And so I think that the leadership vision and mission to build small pieces of software that did one thing well and then be able to assemble them to create different experiences for the customer. It started with thinking about the customer first, and it certainly was made real because of the real courage that the leadership had to stay the course and not just find quick fixes.
Well, that's a great message to kind of end our discussion on, I think, because that's one that Cliff and I continue to drive through, our podcasts and our story here with both. Cliff, anything else as we close out?
No, I appreciate, not really, but I appreciate you guys, Brandon, Ryan, appreciate you visiting with us today, and appreciate the critical impact you had on our ability to pull this off by 2018. When we did turn it on in a small town in Louisiana, the first time, franchisee took it and ran with it. To them, it almost seemed magical. And to me, it was good to finally be giving birth. I'd hoped for it even ahead of that, but nonetheless, it was a great result and a great partnership. We appreciated that and appreciate you sharing it with us today. So thanks for your time, and best of luck moving forward.
Thanks, Cliff and Craig, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
All the best. Talk soon.
This has been Bricks and Clicks from Forbes Books. If you want to learn more about how traditional businesses can evolve, innovate, and lead with the 21st century customer and ever-changing market conditions, go to bricksandclicks.com and click on how to create your digital roadmap.